You don't have to believe what I'm about to tell you. Frankly, I wouldn't either, if I weren't the one who survived it. My name is Daniel Weaver, Dr. Daniel Weaver. If you're a university person, though nobody ever says it to my face unless they're trying to be cute, and I spent the last 10 years crawling through mud, shit, and 6 flavors of Midwestern hell collecting data that only a handful of grad students ever read. My specialty is predatory behavior among North American carnivores, which means when a rancher calls the Forest Service about an animal attack. I'm the guy who eventually gets to go check it out. People have ideas about field biologists. Perhaps you envision a tweedy birdwatcher with binoculars, or a giddy Steve Irwin type who thinks snakes are just misunderstood. If you're thinking of me, though, you should imagine a man who spent more time talking to his dog than to his entire social circle combined, and whose last hot shower involved a bottle of Dr. Bronner's and a garden hose. You might ask why I'm sharing this now, 4 months after the incident, instead of hiding under a new name, or letting the next unlucky bastard stumble across the evidence for themselves. The answer is simple: guilt. Even if nobody ever takes this seriously, I have to try. I owe that much to Juno, my dog, and to the next poor son of a bee who thinks he's the top of the food chain in the woods. But let me be clear, this is not a campfire story or some true horror podcast. There will be no lessons about the hubris of man or the noble wisdom of beasts. There is only what happened and what happened after. It was supposed to be a routine data collection, 6 weeks in the Ouachitas, monitoring trail cams and wolf scat for an NSF grant. I had the cabin all to myself, perched on a granite outcrop 20 miles from the nearest paved road, and the only other living thing in a mile radius was Juno, my black lab. I know what you're expecting. A slow ramp, some foreshadowing. Maybe the neighbor's dog disappears, and everyone shrugs and drinks another beer. But that's not how it happened. 1 week in, I was still enjoying the peace, making notes about deer migration, and feeling like a fraud for how easy the gig was. Then, one evening, my world suddenly collapsed into 3 hours of terror, pain, and a lot of things my doctorate could not help me make sense of. If you want to stop listening now, go ahead. No hard feelings. But if you're the type who needs to know how the trick is done, if you want to see the teeth behind the curtain, I invite you to keep going. My only promise is this: every word you read is true, or as true as I can make it. My field station was a 20 by 30-foot log cabin that had once been a fire lookout, before satellites made men like my father obsolete. The place was held together by moss, ancient nails, and a vague sense of government neglect. Solar panels powered a mini-fridge, a few light bulbs, and a laptop. Everything else ran on propane. Most days began the same: instant coffee, protein bar, a few minutes of stretching before Juno and I set off to collect scat samples and swap trail cam batteries. The dog was always first through the door, tail high, nose sweeping the air like a Geiger counter. In open country, labs are notoriously dumb, distracted by every squirrel and puddle. But Juno was different. Once the harness went on, she was all business. She could sniff out wolf urine at 100 yards, and once chased a wounded bobcat up a creek bed for 3 straight hours before collapsing, tongue lolling, in the back seat of my university-issued truck. By the 2nd week, we'd fallen into a rhythm. Hike the designated routes, log coordinates, collect whatever the local carnivores left behind, and return by dusk. I'd sit on the porch, review and upload the data and the trail cam footage, eat a reheated pouch of lentil stew, and let Juno gnaw her way through a bone. The study focused on coyote-wolf hybridization, but I soon realized I was the only one who cared about the distinction. My supervisors wanted volume, more samples, more photos, more proof that the predator resurgence in Arkansas wasn't just an artifact of digital counting. To them, a coyote was a wolf, was a feral dog. The only difference was who paid the bounty when a rancher's calf went missing. The day of the incident was overcast, the sky capping everything with a lid of cheap gray that made even the pines look washed out and brittle. I'd spent the afternoon out in the woods, bagging the sort of scat sample that pays for grant renewals. Juno was with me the whole day, sniffing for shit, quick-stepping ahead at every curve, then pausing to check I was still coming. We'd done the circuit so often she could have navigated it blind, but she always kept me in her periphery. I appreciated the loyalty, though I suspected it was really about the treats she got for every pile of scat she found. We got in a little after 6, and as always I did the porch routine. Knock boots, leash Juno to the log rail, and scrub hands before handling the tech. Then I brought the laptop out to the porch, hoping for a cell signal strong enough to upload my work. The air was still and dense, the woods gone silent in a way that warned of a coming cold snap. I sat up at the ancient table, backlit by the yellow glow from the cabin window, and made a game of sipping my coffee without getting mosquitoed. Juno lay stretched across the deck beside me, chin flat to the boards, sound asleep in the pose of a dog content to let the world keep spinning without her. I don't remember what broke my concentration. Probably a ping from the trail cam software. I checked the timestamp, 6:47, just before full dark, the perfect window for bobcat or coyote traffic. I toggled through the day's captures, expecting the usual blurs, white-tailed deer, maybe a band of turkey. Instead, the frame showed nothing but an empty forest and a smear of motion in the lower right. I dismissed it, typed a note to review later, and set the laptop to hibernate. Juno didn't move when I stood, though her tail flicked once against my boot as I stepped over. "Bathroom break," I told her, as if she needed the news bulletin. I left the porch door cracked behind me and moved quickly through the cabin. I'd just sat down on the pot when the dog's bark hit me in the sternum. Not her usual mailman bark either, the kind of drawn-out, primal warning that means serious business. My first thought was a raccoon. Juno had her moments of overreaction, especially when something small and nocturnal got too close to her space. She'd always been territorial. "Damn it, girl," I muttered, standing up and pulling my pants up again. My breath hitched slightly as the barking turned into yowls that curdled into something far worse, a sound I didn't think a dog could make. It was higher-pitched, raw and broken, like metal scraping over gravel with a layer of panic underneath. My heart punched against my ribs as I stumbled out of the bathroom, buttoning up my jeans as I went. "Juno!" I called, my voice cracking. By the time I reached the porch door, it was too late. The dog was gone. Everything was quiet again. The leash dangled loose, frayed at the end like it had been chewed through, or worse, ripped apart. My stomach dropped as I scanned the porch, the blood draining from my face faster than my brain could process what I was seeing. Juno's stainless steel water bowl was overturned, its contents puddling between the warped boards. A streak of something dark, mud, maybe? No, too red, smeared across the boards, leading to a splatter pattern near the edge of the porch. My chest tightened as I crouched down, fingers trembling, and touched the dark smear. It was still wet, sticky against my skin, and there was no mistaking the coppery tang that hit the back of my throat a second later. Blood. I froze there for a moment, crouched on the planks, every instinct in me screaming to do something, anything. But what? The rational part of my brain demanded I start piecing together what had happened, but the primal animal part of me could only say Juno's name over and over in my head like some kind of desperate prayer. Eventually, I followed the smear of blood to the edge of the porch, my legs nearly giving out beneath me as I noticed the splintered railing off to the side. The flashlight was suddenly in my hand. I barely remembered grabbing it, and I clicked it on with shaking fingers. Then I stumbled off the porch, boots crunching on the gravel path as my eyes darted wildly into the tree line. "Juno!" I shouted, my voice cracking under the weight of panic. The word echoed out into the absolute stillness, swallowed quickly by the oppressive quiet of the forest. There was no bark in response, no rustle of bushes, no frantic scrambling of paws, just silence. The beam cut into the woods, slicing through layers of pale trunks and shadow. My breath came shallow and fast, each exhale clouding in the chill air as I scanned the underbrush, desperate for movement, for Juno's silhouette, for anything that made sense. I caught it in the beam of the flashlight, a smudge in the soil just beyond the gravel path. At first, I thought it might have been one of my own boot prints, But as I stepped closer, my gut twisted. The shape was wrong, too elongated. The edges blurred like something heavy had pressed into the damp earth and then shifted, dragging slightly. My breath hitched as I leaned down for a better look. Two impressions, side by side. Toes, longer than they should be, ending in faint divots. Claws? My mind reeled, trying to fit the image into any category of predator I'd ever studied. It wasn't a bear, coyote, or cat. It looked almost human, but the tracks were too wide, too deep, left by something heavy, a few 100 pounds at least. I felt my stomach churn, a cold sweat breaking out under my collar. I forced myself to follow the trail, the beam of the flashlight jittering across the ground as my hands shook. Every step felt like it took hours, and every inch of me screamed to turn back, to get inside, lock the door, and pretend none of this was happening. But I couldn't. Juno was out there, and I couldn't stop. Not while there was still some hope, no matter how faint. The tracks led me into the trees, their jagged edges fading as the ground hardened under the thick canopy. Each print was spaced unevenly, as if whatever made them had moved with a lurching, unnatural gait. A low branch snagged my jacket, and I flinched so hard I nearly dropped the flashlight. My breath sounded ragged in my ears, too loud against the heavy silence pressing in from all sides. After about 20 yards, the trail became indistinguishable. No more prints, no broken branches, no sign of anything having passed through. But there was something else, a smell. At first it was faint, just a suggestion of something wrong threading through the cool, pine-scented air. But then it grew, sharp and unmistakable, saturating every breath until I gagged. It was the stink of rotten meat, meat left too long in the sun, bloated and curdled. But there was something else underneath it, something sour and acrid, like ammonia mixed with damp fur. The combination twisted my stomach into knots. I clamped a hand over my mouth and nose, but it didn't help. It clung to the back of my lungs, settling into my sinuses like a physical weight. My legs locked up as the realization crept over me in cold, clammy waves. I wasn't alone out here. Something was watching me. I don't remember turning around. 1 second, I was standing there, the reek of decay clawing at my throat, every nerve in my body strung tight enough to snap. The next, I was stumbling backward, the flashlight beam jittering wildly across the trees, as though hoping to catch something that wouldn't be there. My chest felt like it might cave in with how hard my heart was hammering, each thud echoing in my ears like a drumbeat of panic. My mind screamed at me to hold my ground, to keep looking, to save Juno. But my legs had other plans. They carried me back the way I'd come, crunching through the underbrush, faster and faster, until I was nearly tripping over myself. I didn't care if it made noise. Whatever was out here already knew where I was. It had been watching me, was still watching me. I could feel it, that prickle at the back of my neck. I was back inside the cabin before I even realized it. I slammed the cabin door behind me and threw the deadbolt with shaking hands, my fingers fumbling over the cold metal as if they'd forgotten how locks worked. My breath came in ragged gasps, raw from the stink that still clung to my throat. Every instinct demanded I keep moving, check every window, every corner, every vulnerability. But for a moment, I just stood there, forehead pressed against the rough wood, trying to will my heart to stop jackhammering in my chest. I had to think. I needed a plan, needed something, anything. The idea came to me like a slap to the back of the head, sudden and so obvious I felt stupid for not thinking of it sooner. The trail cameras. There were 6 of them, scattered along a rough circle about 100 yards out from the cabin. None were pointed at the porch. They weren't set up for security, just wildlife monitoring. But one of them should have been close to where whatever this was had dragged my dog into the woods. If it had passed through there, maybe, just maybe, the camera had caught something. Then it hit me like a gut punch. The laptop. I'd left it out on the porch. The thought nearly sent me into a full-blown panic. I needed the laptop to access the trail camera footage. Losing it would mean losing any chance of figuring out what had happened to Juno. I couldn't leave it out there. but the idea of stepping back outside made my skin crawl. I forced myself to move, adrenaline dulling my fear just enough to function. My hand hovered over the deadbolt, fingers curled and clammy as I strained to hear anything beyond the cabin walls. The wind had picked up, skimming through the trees with an eerie hiss, but nothing else. No footfalls, no snapping branches. Still, my gut said whatever was out there hadn't gone far. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only a few seconds, I turned the lock slowly, wincing at the tiny click it made. I cracked the door just enough to glance out. The laptop was still sitting on the table where I'd left it, the screen dark but intact. My eyes darted past it, scanning every inch of the porch and the tree line beyond. Nothing moved, no sound, but the wind whipping through the pines. I swallowed hard, my throat dry and tight, and eased the door open wider. The moment the laptop was in my arms, I bolted back to the cabin door. My sneakers skidded across the planks as I lunged inside, slamming the door shut behind me with enough force to rattle the entire frame. My hands fumbled at the lock, slick with sweat, before finally finding purchase on the bolt. It slid home with a heavy clunk that vibrated through my chest, a sound that felt like the first solid barrier between me and whatever was out there. I locked the laptop in a death grip as I stumbled to the table, my knees trembling like they might buckle beneath me at any second. The cabin felt too small, too exposed, the flimsy walls nothing but a suggestion of safety. My throat burned from the sprint, but I forced the panic down, telling myself to focus, just focus. I needed answers. The laptop whirred to life under my hands as I slapped it open, the faint blue glow from the screen casting a cold light across the room. I navigated to the trail camera software, my fingers still shaking. Juno's absence was a physical weight pressing on my chest, but I couldn't let myself spiral. Not now. I owed her more than useless panic. Each trail cam transmitted its images to the laptop whenever I ran the nightly sync. Short-range radio, good for about 100 yards, if nothing big blocked the line of sight. I initiated the sync. My fingers moved on their own, pulling up the most recent files from the trail cameras as they came in. I opened the folder for the camera closest to where the footprints had led me earlier. The images loaded sluggishly, as my setup was anything but fast. The first few images were uneventful, grainy shots of wind-tossed branches, a doe slipping between the trees at dusk, the faint blur of something small and fast, probably a fox. My stomach churned with impatience as I clicked through them, each useless frame ratcheting my frustration higher. Then I saw it. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. The timestamp read 6:50, just 3 minutes after I'd gone to the bathroom. The image was darker than the others, the twilight thickening into early night. The camera hadn't switched to night vision yet, but there, just at the edge of the frame, was a shape that didn't belong. I leaned closer to the screen, my breath hitching as I squinted at the distorted figure. It stood upright, half obscured by a tree trunk, its outline sharp against the dim background. I leaned in closer, squinting at the screen as my pulse hammered in my ears. The thing's shape was distorted, blurry from motion or bad focus, but even through the artifacting, I could tell it wasn't human. It had the rough proportions of a man, broad shoulders, long legs, but the limbs were wrong, too long, and the way it hunched made my stomach twist. Its head was misshapen, oblong, and tapering at the top like an animal's, but far too big for any species I knew. And the eyes, God, the eyes, were two pale, reflective pinpricks that stared directly at the camera, directly at me. The photo sat frozen on the screen, and I couldn't look away even as my chest tightened and my mouth went dry. Every rational part of me scrambled for an explanation, turning over possibilities and discarding them just as fast. A bear standing upright? No. Too lean, too angular. I clicked to the next image, my pulse hammering my skull like a warning drum. The figure was still there in the second frame, only this time it had moved closer to the camera. That twisted, upright silhouette seemed to lean in, one long arm reaching out toward the lens, the claws on its digits catching what little light remained. My stomach churned violently. There was no mistaking those claws now. They were massive, hooked things like sickles, and they glinted wetly, as if slick with some unholy residue. The flashlight trembled in my peripheral vision, where I'd left it on the table. But the image on the screen was brighter than any beam I could shine. That face, or what passed for a face, had come more into focus, too. The muzzle was elongated, lined at the edges with jagged teeth. Its skin, or fur, was mottled, uneven, like patches of mange exposing raw, pale flesh beneath a thin covering of coarse, dark gray hair. The eyes burned into me, twin points of cold, predatory focus. Definitely not human. But despite my years of experience as a zoologist, I had no idea what the hell I was looking at. I clicked forward to the next image, though every nerve in my body screamed at me to stop. My hand felt detached from my brain, operating on some numb autopilot. The thing was even closer, stepping fully into the frame now. My stomach tightened as I took in the details. Long limbs corded with muscle, each joint bending wrong, as if it had learned to walk upright through mimicry rather than design. Its torso was long, tapering into a sunken stomach that looked almost emaciated, ribs visible beneath the patchy fur. But its face, that face, was the worst of it. The muzzle jutted forward like a wolf's, but shorter and wider. The skin pulled tight over angular cheekbones that seemed more human than animal. The teeth in the gaping maw were uneven, broken, and jagged, almost as though something had tried to gnaw its way out from the inside. Its mouth hung open in a twisted sneer. Lips curled back far enough to expose blackened gums, as strings of saliva hung in threads between those uneven fangs. I clicked to the next frame, and my breath froze in my chest. The creature was no longer facing the camera. It had moved deeper into the frame. Its grotesque silhouette now turned slightly to the side as it lumbered away. For the first time, I noticed something trailing behind it, something low to the ground, dragging limply through the underbrush. My heart pounded as I adjusted the screen's brightness, trying to make out the shape. The next image loaded, and everything inside me fell apart. It was Juno. Her collar was unmistakable, even through the grainy resolution of the trail cam photo. Her body hung slack, her head twisted at an unnatural angle. The frayed leash dangled from her collar, tangling in the underbrush as the thing dragged her like some macabre trophy. I couldn't outrun or deny it any longer. Juno wasn't coming back. The images on the screen left no room for argument, no scraps of hope to cling to. I slammed the laptop shut and shoved it away like it might bite me, my breath rasping in and out in sharp, shallow gasps. My hands trembled against the table, palms slick with sweat. There was nothing I could do, and that realization hit me like a punch to the gut, knocking the wind out of me more effectively than any physical blow. Juno was gone. Gone, and, God help me, the thing that had her was still out there. My first impulse was to grab my keys and make a break for the truck, but the thought barely formed before I crushed it. The trailhead was a quarter-mile from the cabin. Running into the woods now would be suicide. Stay put. Stay inside. Keep the doors locked. Head out in the morning, and you'll be fine. The words looped in my head, steady as a heartbeat, the only anchor I had against the rising tide of panic. I checked the doors, front entrance, and back porch, as well as every window in the cabin, and then checked them again. Both doors were solid wood and had both a lock and a deadbolt each. The windows were weak points, but they sat relatively high and weren't particularly wide. The thing could break them and crawl through, but it would take it a few seconds and at least give me some time to react. My thoughts jumped to the bear spray in my backpack. While that certainly wouldn't kill the creature, it might be enough to drive it back and make it think twice about coming after me. It works on 1,000-pound bears, so why not with this thing? I took it out of the backpack and laid it on the coffee table in the living room, where I could get to it quickly if push came to shove. Sleep was out of the question after what had just happened. So, I decided to make the best of it and started sifting through the trail cam footage again. Perhaps I could learn more about what this thing was. Deep down, I knew it was a fool's errand. The cameras had been recording for months, but at least it kept me busy. I fumbled for the cabinet above the sink, my thoughts a tangled mess, as my hand found the bottle of whiskey I'd brought for the long nights of data crunching. The first swig burned like hellfire, and I welcomed the distraction, the warmth crawling down my throat and spreading into my chest. Anything to take the edge off, anything to stop my brain from replaying those images, from picturing Juno limp and broken in the claws of that thing. Sifting through old footage frame by frame had the intended effect. I completely lost myself in the grainy images for hours, searching for anything that could help me understand what the hell was going on in these woods. The whiskey sat mostly untouched beside the laptop, its seal cracked but barely a finger's worth gone. I was never a big drinker, no matter how desperate I got. I managed to go through several months of trail cam footage, hunting for a pattern that just wasn't there. Nothing out of the ordinary. No appearances other than the few frames from when that thing took Juno. Either this thing had just migrated into the area, or it was smart enough to recognize trail cams and avoid them. The implications of that sent a shiver down my spine. That would mean it possessed human-like intelligence. It was smart enough to time its attack on Juno perfectly, picking a moment when it knew I was occupied. But understanding modern technology, that would be a whole different level. I still had half a year's worth of footage to go through, and was determined to keep going. I needed to figure out what I was dealing with. Whatever was out there in the woods was more than likely a danger to human lives. Hikers, hunters, and even the rangers that patrolled these woods. But just as I turned my eyes back to the screen, I noticed something in my peripheral vision. It was a glint that caught my eye, something subtle and out of place at the edge of the monitor's reflection. I turned, squinting toward the back door, which was maybe 12 feet behind me and to my left. The doorknob. It was turning, slowly, like someone trying not to make a sound. I hadn't heard any footsteps, no creaking floorboards, no warning whatsoever. I froze instantly, my whole body locked up, as if my muscles had suddenly stopped responding to my brain's commands. For a second I thought, hoped, it was just my imagination. But no, the doorknob moved again, and every hair on my body stood on end. My eyes flicked to the deadbolt, reassuring myself it was still in place. It was, and the door itself was locked. I had checked that before I started reviewing the footage. A wave of relief washed over me, but I decided to grab the bear spray from the coffee table, just in case. That decision probably saved my life. Just as I pushed myself up from the chair, as quietly as possible, the doorknob stopped turning. I'd just begun to lean forward, reaching for the canister, when the door exploded inward with a sound like a gunshot. The force ripped the deadbolt clear of the jamb and sent the heavy wooden door skidding across the floor, scattering splinters and chunks of bent metal. I barely had time to register the impact before a tall shape filled the entire doorway. It reeked. The ammonia-rot stench from earlier hit me in a suffocating wave, thick enough to taste before I even got a good look at the thing. When my gaze finally locked onto the thing, all the words I'd ever used to describe predators, every academic term I'd ever deployed to domesticate the wild, apex, opportunist, obligate carnivore, went out the window in an instant. It ducked under the splintered lintel, a grotesque ballet of muscle and bone. In the academic sense, I suppose you'd call it digitigrade, a stance not unlike a wolf's, but all wrong, all stretched and packed into something too big and too vertical. It had no business walking upright, but it did, a little hunched, a little knock-kneed, like its bones had grown too fast for the skin to keep up. The head scraped the crossbeam. It was almost 7 feet in the hunched pose. The arms dangled nearly to the knees, hands, paws, the size of dinner plates, tipped with claws that measured at least 2 inches each. It wore its fur like an old tattered robe, matted and thick along the shoulders, balding in patches over the rib cage where the skin showed through in sickly, mottled gray. Its face was the worst of it by a country mile. The mouth hung open, lips peeled back in a permanent rictus, and the teeth were an evolutionary arms race gone haywire, some jagged and yellowed, others new and needle-sharp, crowding the jaw like a bear trap. The muzzle was short and broad, somewhere between a baboon and a hyena, but wider than either. It hesitated for a split second after stepping through the doorway, cocking its head, sizing me up, I realized, a gesture so uncannily human that it nearly brought me to my knees. It knew I was here, not just as prey, but as a thinking being. I had always believed the most dangerous animal was the one that didn't care what you were, just that you were edible. This thing was worse. It calculated. I could see the arithmetic in its posture. My instincts took over. I grabbed the bear spray from the coffee table and hit the button, aiming straight for its face. The cone of orange gas caught it full in the face from about 7 feet away. The effect was immediate. The creature jerked back, bellowing, its mouth working in a snarl of rage and agony. The snarl deepened into a sound I'd never heard outside of nightmares, something between a wolf's growl and a man's scream. Then, still reeling, it howled, not the romantic, distant call they put in nature documentaries, but a phlegmy, raw animal shriek that blasted pain straight through my skull. The bear spray confused it just long enough for me to snatch up the first makeshift weapon that caught my eye, the nearly full whiskey bottle on the desk, next to my laptop. I didn't even process the decision. One moment, the glass was in my hand. The next, I was lunging towards the monstrosity, swinging it with every ounce of panic and muscle I could summon. The whiskey bottle caught the thing square on the temple and exploded in a wet, amber burst. Shards of glass and high-percentage alcohol splattered its face and chest, slicing a jagged red line down its cheek and soaking the skin in a sticky mess. The impact sent it staggering backwards, momentarily, probably more from surprise than injury. But then something else happened. The whiskey mixed with the bear spray, an oil-based capsaicinoid aerosol. The reaction was much more immediate and ugly than I could have hoped for. The stuff must have gotten into the open wound on its cheek. It was like I'd poured bleach onto an open nerve, and the beast went into an all-out meltdown. It convulsed sideways, smashing its head against the side wall of the cabin several times, its screams changing into an almost human sobbing sound. It clawed frantically at its own face, trying to scrape the sticky mixture off its skin. I didn't pause to admire my handiwork. Fear finally got the better of me, and I scrambled backward toward the bedroom and slammed the cheap hollow-core door behind me, then twisted the lock. The whole cabin seemed to shake on its cinder-block foundation as the creature in the living room lost its mind. I barely managed to keep it together as I tried to figure out what to do next. There were no guns in the cabin, only the bear spray, which I still held in my left hand. I looked at the window. The narrow trail that led to the truck was right there. Maybe I could make it in a sprint, but the forest was pitch dark. My phone and flashlight were still in the living room. That thing would eventually recover, and the bedroom door would be no match for it. Taking it on in an open space was suicide. But maybe I could catch it off guard again somehow. Confuse it long enough so I could grab the flashlight and make a run for it. But the bear spray alone wouldn't be enough. I had to hurt it. Really hurt it. My eyes scanned the room, desperate for anything that could serve as a weapon, or even a distraction. The bedroom was as barren as a monk's cell. A pressboard dresser, a twin mattress on a plywood frame, and a stack of field guides on a nightstand. Then I noticed the pocket knife. It was a cheap folding model I'd found in a gas station midway through Oklahoma. 3.5 inches of thin, battered steel. I'd never even sharpened it, but right now it was the closest thing I had to a weapon. I snatched it from the nightstand, flipping the blade open with a trembling thumb, and tried not to think about how absurd it was to face off against this monster with such a sorry excuse for a weapon. I needed more. The screaming had ceased, and I suddenly heard the doorknob turning behind me. Panicking, my mind somehow managed to come up with a plan without any conscious effort on my part. I ripped the bedsheet off the mattress and turned toward the door just as it exploded into the room. I aimed the bear spray, but hesitated for a second, just long enough for the thing to squeeze itself through the frame. Then I let loose. Once again, the orange fog hit its torn cheek, and both eyes as they locked onto me. It made a choked, almost pitiful yelp and went berserk again, raking at its own snout. While it stumbled sideways into the room, I charged and threw the bedsheet over its head and face. With the beast in pain and now completely blinded, I saw my chance. I dropped the bear spray, grabbed the pocket knife again, and barreled straight toward it, blade raised, jabbing blindly at the writhing head under the sheet. The first stab, if you can even call it that, met something so hard and unyielding it nearly snapped the knife from my grip. Before I could bring the blade down again, a clawed hand disentangled itself from the shredded linen and swung towards me. The claws hit my flank like a set of garden rakes, easily tearing through cotton, skin, and whatever loose tissue they met underneath. I staggered from the force of the impact, but didn't feel any pain in that moment, thanks to adrenaline. Instead, I managed to stab at its face once more, aiming higher at what I hoped was an eye socket. This time, the blade hit soft tissue and sank in all the way to the hilt. I won't waste your time with a beat-by-beat of the swipes, the screams, the backpedaling, and how I managed to get through the empty doorway and into the hallway while the beast was trying to pull the tiny knife out of its eye. Even though I was hurt, I had created the opening I'd hoped for. The main room was a complete mess. Claw marks, tufts of fur, blood, and even what smelled like urine were everywhere on the floor. The laptop had been flung off the desk and stepped on by the looks of it. I didn't bother to pick it up. The field pack lay on the floor next to the sofa. My hands moved without conscious input. Flashlight, truck keys, all there. Then I bailed, not even checking if the monster was following. It wouldn't have mattered, as running was the only play I had left. Suffice it to say, I made it to the truck. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to talk about this whole thing. I don't remember much of the run down the trail or the drive. Just flashes. I must have hit the road doing 40. Tires fishtailing as I turned back onto the narrow service road. The shock had insulated me and allowed me to keep going despite the 4 deep gouges across my ribs. I didn't feel it until I was almost halfway to the hospital. My hands shook so badly on the wheel that I could barely keep the truck on the road. Every pothole sent a bolt of lightning through my side, but I didn't dare stop. The receiving nurse did a double take when I staggered in. Maybe it was the amount of blood, or maybe the fact that there was a 10-inch wide set of claw marks visible along my flank. She didn't even try to play it cool. "What? Holy God, what did that to you?" she said, reaching for the call button with one hand, while already moving in with the other to peel my shirt away from the wound. I tried to answer, but the words caught somewhere between my teeth and tongue. Then I must have blacked out, because the next thing I remember was waking up in a white hospital bed, sweating like a pig. My nightmare didn't end there. The fever that followed was like nothing I'd ever had, not in the malaria field seasons, nor the food poisoning I'd picked up in grad school. For over 2 weeks, I lay in that damn hospital bed, every inch of my skin crawling like I was rolling in fire ants. My entire body alternated between shivering and burning. The pain in my side had dulled to a steady, poisonous throb, but my thoughts kept breaking apart, bubbles rising and popping in the soup of my brain. Every few days, a parade of white coats and green uniforms came to gawk at me. They asked the same questions over and over. Did I remember what attacked me? Did I have a history of seizures? Had I used meth or eaten wild mushrooms? I must have given them a dozen answers, none of which made sense even to me. Big animal, I told them. Upright, werewolf, the word hung there. Ugly, and the final nail in the coffin of my credibility. They treated me with broad-spectrum antivirals, tetanus boosters, rabies prophylaxis, IV fluids, and enough antibiotics to kill a small pig. But the fevers didn't break right away. The delirium came in waves. Someone guessed I'd picked up something exotic in the woods. Tularemia, leptospirosis, hantavirus. Hell, even anthrax was mentioned once. But every culture came back negative. No bacteria, no parasites, no known virus. On day 13, the fever finally broke. I went from 103.8 to normal in 24 hours. The vomiting stopped. My white cell count plummeted back to baseline. They moved me and kept me in isolation for another week after that. I had pulled through, mainly thanks to my own immune system, the doctors explained. None of the things they injected me with had had any visible effect. I didn't turn into a werewolf, if that's what you're wondering. Ever since I let that word slip, everyone around me keeps bringing it up and joking about it. The answer is no. No howling at the moon. No sudden urge to eat raw meat or chase cars or whatever else you might expect from a guy who got mauled by a cryptid. No supernatural healing factor either. I healed up just as shitty and slow as any other 43-year-old who never really took care of himself. The scars are still there, puckered and purple, like a set of railroad tracks under my left arm. I hate looking at them, as it brings back all the memories of that night, that impossible creature dragging Juno into the forest and then coming after me inside that damn cabin. The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of interviews, paperwork, and painkillers. Some overworked Forest Service clerk came by my house with a stack of forms and a phone preloaded for press inquiries. The press never called, something, I suppose, to be grateful for. Rangers showed up twice more, each time asking the same questions. I repeated the whole story twice, but leaving out the werewolf part. Both wrote down what I told them, nodded gravely, and then gently, politely, let me know the official report would read, likely rogue bear, black or possibly brown, exhibiting atypical behaviors due to human habituation. Case closed. I could read the subtext clearly. My laptop had been recovered. The screen had been shattered. The hard drive crushed. I told them there were images on it, photographic evidence. They smiled politely and said they'd see what they could recover, which of course meant nothing. The remaining trail cam footage, the files I hadn't had a chance to examine before the attack, didn't reveal anything either. Still, I am telling you about it now, because if I stay silent, it'll happen again. Some other biologist, a camper, maybe a kid on a dirt bike who doesn't make it back to the trailhead before dark, and they might not be as lucky as I was.